Good morning, everyone. My name is Molly Baldwin. I'm the CEO and founder of Roca, and we really appreciate you joining us for this session this morning. Roca is a violence intervention and behavioral health program for young people most likely to shoot or be shot. We have a real time-tested evidence-based intervention model grounded in Rewire's CBT, a breakthrough behavioral health approach based on brain science and brought to the streets other agencies and police departments. Roca's mission is to relentlessly disrupt violence by engaging people, young people, police, and systems to address trauma, find hope, and drive change. We work directly with about 2,000 young people across the state of Massachusetts, in Baltimore City, and in Hartford, Connecticut. In Massachusetts, Roca young people recidivate 30% less than their peers of like risk. Research shows that Roca is more effective the higher the risk the young person. The Roca Impact Institute equips institutions and individuals working at the center of urban violence with tools and strategies to also address trauma, reduce violence, and improve outcomes for young people. The Institute works with community violence intervention programs, juvenile and young adult criminal justice initiatives, and police and correction officers, which is Rewire4 that you will hear about more today. We have worked with over 8,000 professionals in the past 3.5 years. It is my great honor to introduce to you Dave Batchelor, the director of Rewire4, retired police captain from Chelsea Police Department, who will tell you about Rewire4 and introduce our great team. Thank you.
Our apologies, but the director, Dave Batchelor, is currently having technical difficulties.
Tune, I'm going to pop him on my computer. All right, let's go ahead, Joe.
Good morning, everybody. I apologize for that delay. Right at the moment when Molly was introducing me, I lost my internet connection, so I'm now on Molly's computer. But Molly, thank you for that introduction. My name is Dave Batchelor. I'm a retired captain from the Chelsea Police Department here in Massachusetts, and currently the director of the Rewire4 training. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to attend this webinar today. We really appreciate all your time and all your support. We have an excellent panel of speakers today, and we have a lot of interesting research and data to deliver to everybody, and and we're excited about that. So before we start, before I introduce the speakers of the day and the panelists of the day, just for those that are on today's webinar, I want to talk a little bit about what Rewire is. I know some of you are familiar with it, but some may not be. So I'm going to talk about a little bit what it is, how it started, and why we're doing it. So a couple of years ago, Molly, she called me, as she has done through her career. I was working in Chelsea for years and years and years. And she said, Dave, we're doing something with young people to help them with emotional regulation that we think can help police officers and corrections officers. So during my career, I've had the opportunity to be involved in a lot of training. And so I looked at the curriculum they were using with young people, and several other officers also looked at it. And we said, there is material in here that we think can help our officers with emotional regulation. And what we had to do was we had to adjust it and adapt it, because we only have one day to train officers, 8 hours. So we reduced it down to what we thought was most relatable to police officers and corrections officers. And since that time, we've trained over 6,000 officers. Now, the whole training is really about emotional regulation, which we know that is very important for police officers today, corrections officers today. Recording devices have, put police officers and corrections officers under a spotlight. So emotional regulation is so critical for officers on and off the job. When we looked at this material that we're using, we said, we think this can be helpful. And the reason why we're doing it, we're trying to help police officers, corrections officers stay in control, have emotional regulation, and increase those positive interactions with our community. Roca has always tried to connect all the partners in the criminal justice system, work together. And I think Molly provided us with something that's very concrete that we can use to help officers stay safe, help our community stay safe, and increase those positive interactions between law enforcement and all of those in our community. You know, we're trying to keep our communities as safe as possible. So we've trained over 6,000 officers. We've been in a few different states. So far, you know, the reception that we've gotten and the information that we're getting about the training has been very, very positive. Now, just quickly, the content of the training is definitely a little different than usual law enforcement training. We talk about brain science, bottom brain, top brain, that survival brain compared to that top brain, the prefrontal cortex, where we do our thinking. Both parts, very helpful depending on the situation. We also talk about trauma and how trauma can impact the behavior of the officers and how trauma can impact the behavior of those they're interacting with. And when we talk about that trauma section, it really, again, the whole training is geared towards emotional regulation. What we're trying to help officers with is that if you can look through that trauma lens and understand why someone might be behaving the way they're behaving, you as an officer don't take it personally. I think sometimes police officers, corrections officers, when they take something personal, that's when they get emotional. And when you get emotional, sometimes you make, you know, poor decisions. So that trauma section is just to really teach police officers and corrections officers that you really never know what someone has gone through in their life. And if you can see through that trauma lens while you are staying safe, you enforce the laws that you enforce, you don't take it personally. And when you don't take it personally, you don't get emotion. It gives you more control. And that's really what the whole training is geared towards, emotional regulation for officers, so we have more positive interactions with those in the community. And then the third section we talk about is cognitive behavioral theory, not therapy. None of us are therapists. Again, I've had the opportunity to do a lot of training in policing. I have never seen CBT in any police training. But when we looked at CBT, you know, we immediately recognized this can be helpful for anyone, but certainly for law enforcement officers. One of the problems for law enforcement officers, and it's not everybody, but there's a lot of officers that can suffer from cynical thinking, negative thinking, and you can see how that makes sense. They're in an environment where there's a lot of negativity, a lot of trauma, and that can start to overwhelm them. CBT tells us that there's a relationship between the way you think impacts the way you feel in your behavior, right? That relationship is impacting your life. And if we can help officers understand that, recognize that just as a tool for themselves so they understand what's going on with themselves. The key to CBT in our training is just to give the officers an opportunity to see what's going on with themselves. If they have that opportunity, they can possibly have more control. And CBT, again, I have not seen it in police training. It really, you know, when we're in class with the officers, you can see how the light bulb goes off, say, wow, that's me. I can see it because you can visualize it in the training because we demonstrated. So those are the three sections. And then we have 4 skills to disrupt what we call unhelpful cycles. If you are out of control emotionally, how do I get myself back, right? How do I disrupt that unhelpful cycle? And that's being present, labeling your feelings, acting on your values, and flexing your thinking. Those are the 4 skills that we use to disrupt unhelpful cycles. That's a quick summary of the training. Now I'm going to introduce our first speaker. It's going to be Dr. John Skinner. John is retired deputy commissioner from the Baltimore Police Department. He's currently a professor at Towson University. And John is, you know, he knows policing, and he also does a lot of research on policing. And he's been extremely helpful for us in collecting this data and making sense of it. So I'm going to hand it over to John. John, I just want to thank you for all the assistance and all the help that you've given us.
Great. Thanks, Dave. I'm really happy to be here. And if it's okay with you, Dave, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So as Dave mentioned, I joined the Rewire4 team as an evaluator. It's about 2 years ago. When Molly and Dave approached me, they wanted to really look into the value of Rewire4, and we created an evaluation plan based upon 2 stages. The first stage is really kind of a descriptive stage where we collected a lot of data from the perceptions of the officers that went through the training. Emotional regulation is very tied to stress. So the way that we kind of created this portion of the evaluation was officers that were kind of coming into the training would take a pre-survey about kind of their emotional regulation and stress levels. They would then attend the training. At the end of the training, they would complete a course evaluation, just their thoughts about the training and the value of the training. And then at the 3-month mark after the training, and then again at the 6-month mark, we had them retake the tests that they took prior to the training. And once again, those post surveys focused really on, their perceptions related to, managing their emotion in difficult situations, managing their levels of stress. So we ran that portion of the evaluation for an 18-month period, and we just published the results. So I'm just going to highlight a couple of the major findings and just give a little bit of background on sort of like what, we learned from the officers along the way. I will mention, and I'll come back to this a little bit later on, this is one of 2 stages. And the second stage is really focused on, understanding how the training impacts officer performance, how it impacts their interactions with the community. And I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of my presentation. So I'll just kind of give a quick overview of the major findings that we found during the first stage, and then I'll go a little bit more into detail on some of these points. The first thing that we learned, I think, is no surprise to anybody who's in a career in public safety, and that's that public safety officers experience an incredibly high level of professional stress, and that this stress sometimes manifests itself in behaviors. There's a lot of research around officer stress and why it occurs. There's also a lot of research on how that stress impacts behaviors by officers. And a lot of the information that we learned from the officers in this study was that all that research really just became really, really valid and very, very real. The officers really honestly talked about their difficulty kind of managing their emotions in situations, how it affected, home life, personal life, different aspects like that. The other thing that we learned is that, officers actually have a pretty strong understanding of how stress and trauma works. And I think that's actually really positive. If I go back to the beginning of my career, Dave's career, probably many people on the call, like stress and trauma really weren't talked about in public safety, definitely not in policing. So there's definitely been a movement in recent years where officers are more educated about the impact of stress and trauma. But a lot of the officers indicated that even though they knew stress and trauma existed, they generally lacked skills and strategies, ways of life really to effectively manage the challenges that come with stress and trauma. And I think that's really why Rewire4 resonated really strongly with the officers. A lot of the officers told us that this was one of the first times in their career where they felt that they had tools that they could manage, all of these challenges that are going to occur over the span of their career. So regardless of the instrument that we use, the officers consistently reported that they found Rewire4 to be interesting, relevant, helpful, and really helpful in the area of, like, once again, creating a foundation of skills and strategies to sort of like improve quality of life and improve performance. We also learned from the officers that Rewire4 helped them gain a better understanding of the importance of empathy within situations. One of the things that Dave's team teaches is that when you're in a difficult situation, one way to manage that situation is to look at the situation from the other person's perspective. And there's a lot of kind of reinforcement within the training that occurs over the span of the class. And officers really, that resonated with them. They really felt that helped them kind of understand these situations in difficult, challenging environments from other people's perspectives. There's also some preliminary evidence that suggests that Rewire4 helps officers improve their emotional regulation in really critical or stressful situations. And I'll show some of the early findings and the trends associated with that, where at that 6-month and 3-month mark, officers are showing, hey, I'm using these skills and these skills are helping me in a variety of different ways and contexts. The other thing too, I'll talk a little bit about this, and I know some of the other speakers will highlight more about this, but there's kind of 2 ways to deliver Rewire4. One is with Roca trainers. The other way is to use internal departmental trainers in the trainer-trainer capacity. And what we found within this first stage of the evaluation is that there was no major loss of quality of the training or fidelity of the training, whether it was Roca staff or internal trainers. Although there's a pretty extensive process to prepare internal trainers to do the training. As Dave mentioned, the content and the training itself is not a normal police training, so it does require a lot of practice and work to kind of deliver it in a way that's effective. But provided officers are kind of go through this process that Dave and his team created, there's a really equal effect in terms of the way that officers in the class receive it, whether it's from the Roca trainers or departmental trainers. So over the 18-month time period, over 5,000 officers attended the training. So at some level or another, all of these officers participated in, one level of the evaluation or the first stage of the evaluation here. This was over 21 different police agencies, and you can see the list here that it ranged from really large police departments like the Baltimore Police Department, and then smaller agencies. There was also a collection of urban, suburban, and rural departments. There was also 3 agencies that serve primarily correctional functions, with the largest being the Middlesex Sheriff's Department, and you'll actually hear from the sheriff today about that. So there was an incredible amount of kind of diversity. These agencies were across 4 different states. And 8 of the agencies had full training implementation, meaning that they trained everybody in the department, and the remaining agencies either sent people to different training opportunities or in the process of reaching full implementation. So an incredible amount of work for the training staff within Roca, over this 18-month time period. I won't go into too much detail, but one of the things that we saw within the evaluation is that there was a really significant diverse level of officers that attended the training and participated in the different survey instruments. So if you look at the right-hand side of the page here, up at the top of this chart are the 4 different survey instruments that we used. And these numbers in these columns here represented the percentage of officers that participated in each one of those instruments, right? So for example, during the pre-test survey, right, 55% of the officers were white and 24% were Black. And then you can see that as it kind of transits to the other instruments. The one thing that was really helpful for us is that, we had an extremely diverse level of officers that participated in the training, and we had a diverse level of officers that participated in the evaluation. And that really gave us an incredible amount of value to kind of dig into the results and figure out how Rewire4 was perceived through different officer groups, whether it be different categories of officers, different years of service, different rank structures, different things like that. If you look on the left side of the screen here, you'll notice that the vast majority of people that went through the training, over 3,500 of them, were actually at the officer, deputy, agent rank, depending upon the nomenclature within the agency. But also there was a good percentage of brand new officers that went through the training that were in like either the training academy or just graduated. And you can see that representation with the red arrow and the agencies on the top when they sent cadets or trainees. And then we also had a collection of supervisors, commanders, civilians. One thing that was really interesting, regardless of rank, regardless of years of service, regardless of age, regardless of category of officer, whether it was racial, gender, or ethnicity, every officer really reported that the training resonated with them. And maybe for a little bit different reasons. If you're in the early stages of your career, maybe it's more foundational. If you're at the middle and late stages of your career, maybe it's more meaningful because you're really starting to feel the effects of, stress and trauma over the span of your career. But one thing that was really unique was how, regardless of where you were within your career or what type of officer you were, this training really seemed very important. We also looked at, once again, during the pre-survey, kind of officers coming in, and reporting their levels of stress, but specifically stress related to the job. So once again, regardless of agency or category of officers, 81% of officers reported, at the very beginning of the training that they were experiencing stress related to the job. And in some cases, very often, or even occasionally, sometimes. The very often category was really high. 17% of the officers were reporting like coming into that training, really experiencing high levels of job-related stress. Once again, it didn't make a difference whether it was, a large urban police department or a rural police department. It seems like, the work of officers, whether it be police officers or correctional officers, they kind of all experience stress in kind of the same ways. This is just an example of, looking at sort of like averages based upon weighted averages based on the Likert scale that we used in the different categories of officers. And these should really be looked at just sort of like as trends. And the takeaway here really is that, once again, whether you're a male or female officer, regardless of your racial group, regardless of, your ethnicity, regardless of whether you're a correctional officer or a police officer, everybody reported similar levels of job-related stress. Once again, that question about 3 months, that, in the past 3 months, how acute has your stress level been related to your job and your work and the job that you do? We did see some little variation based upon years of service, and there's a lot of research that, kind of confirms our findings that stress tends to grow over an officer's kind of career. So in the early stages of an officer's career, whether it's a correctional officer or a public safety officer, you're kind of just coming on the job and you're feeling very, very excited and you're getting exposed to things, but you may not really feel, the true impact of that stress or that trauma. So in the earlier stages of the career, those officers that were in that category, they actually reported a slightly lower weighted average of stress, but then it kind of jumps right by year 4 and then extends through an officer's career up to year 20, and then only begins to recede as an officer gets a little bit closer to retirement. And once again, this is probably not new information, right? There's a lot of research that has previously showed these different kind of milestones over a career in public safety and how it affects stress. And our findings related to all of our work here really just kind of confirms that. The officers, this was one thing, quite honestly, that was somewhat surprising to me in the beginning of how honest the officers were. So once again, before they took the Rewire4 class, they really gave, I think, some very, very interesting and truthful insight into sort of like the way that stress impacted them on a day-to-day basis. So this was a question that said, hey, listen, when I'm angry or stressed, I have difficult controlling my actions. And you can see here that close to 60% of officers reported that, yes, like when I'm in a stressful situation or if I feel like my emotions are running away from me, I have a difficulty controlling my actions within those situations. And a lot of them fall into that sometimes category. But even if we only looked at the top category, very often, that represented 10% of the officers. And based upon our numbers, right, that's 500 officers reporting within our sample, right, that, they were experiencing stress in a way that was affecting their actions on a pretty regular basis, either very often or often. This is also self-reported data. These are, surveys that the officers are completing anonymously. So you have to think, because it is self-reported survey data, that these numbers may be actually a little bit low, and that the true number may be a little bit higher than this. And once again, it's really kind of stood out from me. We began to see this trend in the data very early on, and it just continued to show itself regardless of the number of officers that went through the training. It was very, very consistent within the data. And then I thought this was also really, really telling. One of the questions that we ask officers before the training is, over the past 3 months, how often have you lost your temper with a coworker, a member of the public, or a person arrested for the crime? And you can see that 20% of the officers had reported that, once again, over the past 3 months, they had lost their temper. And, once again, 20% is a smaller percentage of the whole, but it still represents an incredible number of officers within our sample. So this is like 1,000 officers out of the 5,000 that are reporting this. And once again, I would just sort of like hallmark this, that this may be a little bit underreported based upon the fact that it's a self-completed survey. Now, the other thing that we learned within the data was that even though officers had a really strong understanding of stress, they really just didn't have a lot of skills or strategy to mitigate that stress or manage that stress within their lives, right? So this is kind of the point that I made a little bit early on about officers sort of like understanding of stress has grown, but we in the field probably haven't done a really great job giving them tools to manage this stress. So if we look on the left-hand side, the question is, when I find myself getting angry or losing control, I use skills to help me remain calm and focused. 42% of officers said that no, they weren't regularly using skills. And once again, this is prior to taking Rewire4. And then, there was definitely a correlation between stress at work and stress at home. So officers reported high levels of stress at work, also high levels of stress at home. There wasn't any sort of like imbalance there. It was always really consistent. So when you think about an officer coming off their tour of duty, their work schedule, right, and coming home, most research would suggest that there needs to be a transitional point, right? So officers kind of, decompress a little bit, yet all of the officers, close to 40%, 46% of the officers that were in our sample, right, didn't have these skills kind of to transition between work and home. Now I'm going to turn this over to Allie. Allie's been working with me on the evaluation. She's done a lot of work on content and thematic analysis related to responses, both during the interview as well as during the evaluation portion. Officers can kind of put in self-comment. So Allie, do you want to walk through these slides?
Sure. Thanks, John. And you can kind of forward to show all the points. Appreciate it. As John said, we really enjoy using a thematic analysis to kind of highlight the key points for this really large set of data that we have. And one reason is that it helps us understand the participants' experience in the training and their perspective of what was most important to them during the training. So on the left, excuse me, you can see that we bucket the open-ended responses. One of the questions that is open-ended is like, what were your two major takeaways from this training? So officers are answers are bucketed based on either if they mention one of the skills, if they mention brain science, if they mention CBT as a whole, cycles, think, feel, do. And we can see that the most important thing that they learned was be present by a pretty great margin of 38%. Following that, officers really enjoyed taking away information about brain science. That includes, as Dave mentioned earlier, explaining how we go into the top brain and bottom brain, neuroplasticity, that our brains are able to be rewired and changed. And also what's important to them is knowing their own triggers or the triggers of their partners in law enforcement. And then following that, we have that overall officers really took away the overall arching CBT, right? And the meaning of that, the meaning of how our feelings and our thoughts and our actions are connected. And on the right side, we do a little thematic brain cloud for you. So the larger that the word is on here is the more often that it is mentioned in those comments. So bottom brain, again, is really important for people understanding that when they're in bottom brain, most likely that's because of a trigger that happened, what their values are regarding the skill, act on your values. We see that change is possible, understanding themselves, understanding other people's perspectives as well. Trauma is a big piece and empathy is a big piece of this. So I think overall, what is great about doing this type of analysis is seeing that officers are walking away with the information that we want them to walk away with. So that's really great to see. And John, if you want to go to the next slide. And so as John said, I assisted with some of our surveys that we did in person for about 3 months, sometimes a little further depending on scheduling. And what I love about doing these in-person interviews is that we get really candid responses. And John and I were able to sit down with a number of officers from Baltimore. One of our other colleagues, John Grossman, was able to sit down with Middlesex Corrections officers. And then we did a few other via Zoom that were a little bit easier to schedule. And so you can see here in just a handful of the comments from these interviews afterwards is that people are really noticing that learning about the brain is important, right? Not only for yourself, but how you can approach this job and how you can do your own work. So we really love seeing that. And again, there isn't a difference between corrections and police. They both see the value and the importance of this, which is absolutely wonderful. John, I'll pass it back to you.
Okay, thanks, Allie. And you'll hear a little bit more about the qualitative, reports when we get to the panel. As Allie mentioned, we did a wide range of interviews from different officers in different agencies, and it was really, I think, very, very telling just to hear kind of their stories and how they, felt before the training, how they felt after the training, how they used the training in different situations. And it was really just universal. It just, the word I always kind of come back to is it just seemed to like resonate very, very strongly with the officers who attended the training. Now, in the course evaluation, these are just some general results across all of the agencies and across the different departments. So 85% of the officers would recommend the training to a colleague. The quality of course instructor was extremely high. It was also extremely high, once again, as I mentioned in the beginning, regardless of whether it was a Roca trained officer or specifically a train the trainer. So there were two agencies that adopted the train the trainer model, the Baltimore and the Boston police departments. They spent a lot of time getting their officers, their in-house officers, experience and ready to deliver the training within the agency. And we really did not see any difference in terms of the quality of the course or the quality of the instructor across those different groups. You can see the one on the fourth bar there, that was really about a question about empathy, so close to 90% of officers reported that the class helped raise their level of empathy. And then this idea of using, the skills both in their personal and professional life. One thing I would say is, and I should have probably mentioned this in the beginning, I give Roca and the Rewire team a lot of credit because they were willing to invest a lot of time and energy in the evaluation portion. My sense is that these findings here are extremely high because most police trainings or correctional trainings don't make these measurements or take the time to measure this level of detail. So it's really difficult to compare, but it's pretty amazing to think, that 85% of officers kind of will come out of that training feeling like this was, profoundly impactful within their careers. So the last couple of slides, I just want to highlight to you that these are trends, right? So this stage of the evaluation is descriptive in nature, meaning that we're trying to identify trends that we're further exploring when we do the second stage of the evaluation. So the blue line here within all of these graphs represent the responses by the officers in the very often category during the pre-survey. So remember, they could take the pre-survey before they attend the training, right? The green line that you see here represents that post-survey that occurs at the 3-month mark, and then the orange yellowish color here represent the results at the 6-month mark. And these were all questions about kind of using skills and kind of managing their problems. So in each time period, you see this kind of pretty big jump, right? So if we look at the first category, I use skills now to remain calm, right? Only 57% of officers were using skills prior to Rewire4, and then that number jumps up to 72%, right, and remains consistent in the 3- and 6-month mark. That's a question about strategies to unplug when you get off from work. You can see the jump there. This is, I think, the middle portion of this bar graph is really telling. We know that seeking help within police and correctional work is very, very challenging. There's a lot of barriers and stereotypes about officers that try to get help to manage their stress or trauma that they're experiencing. So the percentages are very, very low. And it's really sad to think that, when an officer is experiencing stress, only 22% of the time are they actually seeking out that stress. But we did see some substantial jumps within even that category, that after the training and kind of talking about these issues, officers were more likely, to get some help. And then you can see a little bit of changes, right, in terms of confidence in managing problems or managing their personal problems. We also looked at the same data in relationship to, this idea of losing emotional control, right? So once again, the blue line on the graph here represents that time period before the training, and the green and the orange represent, at the 3- and 6-month mark. So officers reported 3 months after the training and 6 months after the training, less frequency in losing their temper, less difficulty controlling their emotions. We did ask a question about how frequently they were using force. They indicated, after 3 and 6 months, they were using force less frequently, and just overall stress about the job. Now, I always kind of caution people that these are all really promising. And they're all, I think, very, very interesting. And they also, I think, very strongly, suggest that Rewire4 has sort of like a lasting impact. A couple of things that we should kind of think about here. One is that there's a residual value of all training, meaning that over time, as people move away from the training, there is sort of like an equalizing effect of that. And one thing I know that Dave and Molly and the Rewire4 team are looking at is how to sort of like sustain, right, that foundation of information that they learn. And I think that's a really important thing to think about. These are also the areas that we're further exploring during the second stage of the evaluation. So in the second stage, we're doing a randomized control trial. We're taking two groups of patrol officers. One group goes through Rewire4, the other group does not. And then we're comparing over the next year how it changes maybe officer performance. Are the Rewire4 officers more likely to seek help when their stress levels are high? Are they more likely or less likely, I should say, to get in a departmental accident or a citizen's complaint? One of the other factors that we're looking at in the second stage of the evaluation is kind of conduct and interactions with citizens. So we're taking surveys with community and victims who had interactions with the two groups of officers and seeing if there's any difference in the performance level or professionalism by officers when they're meeting with victims after a crime. We should have results related to that stage probably by the end of next year. And I think a lot of that is based upon this foundation of information that we gathered specifically in these differences that we're seeing at the 3-month and 6-month mark. Now, just to wrap up a couple of quick thoughts, and then I'll turn it back to Dave, and I'll be available for questions when we get to that point. Also, I believe that the report that we completed, Molly will be sending that out. So I'm happy to answer questions after times that people have had a chance to look at the evaluation report. My kind of takeaways, from all the things that I looked at is that the pre-test surveys that we conducted really demonstrate the need for Rewire4 and other types of training like this, right? Officers really just need these skills, right, to help them manage these really difficult situations and job functions. And looking at that second point, right, it really matters to all officers. It doesn't make a difference whether you're a correctional officer or a police officer. It doesn't make a difference where you work or where you are in the stage of your career. Trainings like Rewire4 are really meaningful for officers. They get a lot out of it. Whether it was the evaluations or the interviews, or as Ali pointed out, the free text space within the course evaluations, like universally officers, reported that the course was very interesting and helpful. It was important for them. The post-test surveys that we conducted at 3 and 6 months marks, I think, demonstrate that officers begin to use the foundation of skills that they learn in the training, and that this helps them. It helps them manage stress. It helps them manage their emotional regulation. And I think it helps them improve their mental resiliency. The post-test surveys and interviews also suggest, once again, that the training increases empathy, and that we're beginning to see some early trends that say, yes, going through trainings that help officers regulate emotion, right, that may be tied to CBT, really help officers when they're in these difficult and challenging situations. So thanks, Dave, for my time. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and kick it back to you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. Thank you, Ali. We really appreciate all the work that both of you are doing collecting this data. I just want to echo something that John said. You don't really see in police trainings, or I haven't seen in police trainings, evaluations. We give trainings to officers, and I mean the goal always, can we provide a training that can help officers? That's always been the goal, but we've never really researched and collected the data to see if it's effective, and which we are doing in this training because we want to make it as best as possible. We have changed a little bit of the curriculum to make it more relatable for the officers based on the feedback that we're getting in the evaluation. So it's important for us to make sure that it's having the effect that it's having, and John and Ali do a great job helping us with that. So next up is going to be the next speaker for the webinar, and it's going to be Commissioner Richard Worley from the Baltimore Police Department. Just a little bit, Baltimore was the first major city that we had the opportunity to deliver Rewire4. And we had it worked out so well, and it was a great relationship. And I just got to put a shout out to Major Derek Loeffler and the Academy Director, Gary Corder. They were fabulous partners in helping us deliver Rewire4 to their officers in Baltimore. So I'll hand this over to Commissioner Worley so he can say, talk a little bit about his experience with the Baltimore Police Department. Commissioner?
Yeah, good afternoon. Good morning, actually. Thank you. Yeah, we were very successful with putting this together and putting it in our academy, and we made it a mandatory training, one-day training. And as with a lot of police trainings, our officers didn't really want to go through a one-day training, but this was something that after they went through it, we've got some of the best comments from our officers. Like several of them said it's the best training that they've ever had. The good thing is we have placed a lot of emphasis on officer health and wellness, and this actually helps them not only in their work life, but in their personal life to make better decisions. Our department was in a really bad area about 4 years ago, and we have completely reformed their police department. We're under a federal consent decree, but we put in so much training and we train our officers a lot. And our training has increased, has gotten a lot better over the last few years. And this happens to be one of them, one of the best ones that we have. And we use internal trainers. And we've got a lot of comments from our officers who have gone through. It's helped them out on the street with dealing with the young people. We have a very, very, which a lot of agencies will probably talk about, is we have a very big problem with juveniles. And this helps our officers deal with this on a daily basis. So it's a skill set that they're putting to use. It's going to make them a better officer, which means we're going to have more success. And basically, since Roca has been in Baltimore, I've been with it since it started. We had some historical decreases in crime last year that we're following up this year. Our homicides this year are down 27%. Our shootings are down almost 40%. And that doesn't go unnoticed with the fact that it's helping our officers deal with these stressful situations. I don't want to jinx it, but we've had less police-involved shootings this year. Our use of force is down. So all these things, I go back to training. And this is one of the better ones that our officers have received. And one of the best received ones that after officers started going through it, we started getting less and less pushback on when they wanted to attend it. They wanted to go through it because they heard good things. So all good news for us. It's only going to help us be a better department. And I can't thank them enough for the training and also to train the trainer. Our trainers have become exceptional at what they're doing. And we're also using some of our retired members have come back to do this training. So something that I think has helped us with the success we've had over the last few years.
Commissioner, thank you very much. And we're very happy to hear that it's helped your department and it's helped your officers. Again, that's the goal for us, is to help as many police officers, corrections officers as possible, which in turn helps community. It helps create those positive interactions with community members. And I know that's one of the goals of Roca, is to, increase those relationships between people that live in our communities in law enforcement. We talk a lot about collaboration in community policing, and this is one way I think Roca is helping us with that. So appreciate your comments, and thank you very much for allowing us to do the training. When I first went down there, I was a little bit nervous. I'm not from Baltimore, but the reception was fabulous, and you have some great officers down there that I was very, very honored to do the training down there with them. And I just want to talk a little bit about retired Major Wells, who's one of our lead instructors, and Lloyd did a great job down there helping us coordinate all the trainings. Thank you.
Yeah, he's exceptional. He's worked for me all through my career. We've worked side by side. And like with us, it's just reforming our department because we have to do more with less. And I don't always like to talk about the staffing, but our staffing, when I joined, we had 3,200 police. Right now, we have 1,983. Oh. So we're doing, our cops are doing more with less, and the way they're able to do that is by delivering tools like this to them. So thank you, guys.
Thank you, thank you, Commissioner. Okay, so our next speaker is Commissioner Michael Cox from the Boston Police Department. Boston was the second major city that we trained in Rewire, and Boston's right next to where I worked for 37 years in Chelsea. So it was really an honor for me to have the opportunity to do the training in Boston. It was something I really looked forward to, and I want to thank Commissioner Cox for giving us that opportunity. And I'm going to let the Commissioner speak a little bit about the experience for Boston PD. Commissioner?
Sure, thank you very much. First I want to talk about the why, we participated in this program. And I thought it was extremely important to, when I heard about this cognitive behavior theory, and actually applying that to people in general to control their emotions, to help de-escalate situations, I thought it was tremendously important that we be a part of it, because we are an organization filled with human beings that happen to do very difficult work. And that if you have a cognitive behavior theory that actually helps undo some of the stress that this job throws on you, or give people the ability to control their emotions a lot more, and it works on all humans, and I knew it was going to work, at least for police officers, because I think that's vitally important. This is a difficult job, we all do, but the fact is we have human beings doing it, and whatever is going to be successful, for humans, what impacts their brains. I thought it was important that our officers, get this training also. We do a lot of training in general across the board, because we layer our de-escalation training. And in a place that believes in community policing, which is really about building trust with the community, it's really important that we emphasize having peaceful encounters and de-escalating things with the public or each other, and in all encounters that we have, because there's no better way to build trust, and making sure that the public knows that we are here to always help. So, the training that, the impact on our department, I think has been, very good. I mean, it's still early on. We trained all our officers and all our command staff and supervisors in the Roca training here. The feedback we've been giving is that the officers, similar to what the surveys have already shown, that the officers are really appreciated and find a great deal of value in this training. And I think that's very, very important, just because the work that's involved in doing this. You talked earlier about, what people are exposed to on this job, and the stress, the day-to-day stress. We do a great deal of, we do a pretty good job of training them and preparing them for so many aspects of what they might meet on the job, but we don't do much related to stress related or things impacting their brain, particularly trauma. And so I think this is going a long way of helping undo some of the impact that trauma has on people who do this work, and at least having some skills to be able to address their concerns. Officer wellness is, I think it's important not only in this department, but I think throughout the country. There's certainly, suicide and things of that nature has been prevalent in this profession for a while. And so helping people understand their thoughts and feelings and what they do is really, really important, I think, to addressing the wellness portion to this job. And there's another aspect to it, particularly around the training, that I thought vitally important. It's just development. Like all organizations, we need to develop our people. And so they're doing a difficult job, but we have an obligation to make sure that they are developed as people, as well as have all the tools and skills they need to do this job. And so this Roca training fit right into all the aspects that we're trying to do. Practice community policing, building trust, making sure the officers' our wellness is taken care of through understanding of what's going on, both in their brain and when things are happening in real time. And then, of course, lastly, just the skill set of being able to de-escalate on a daily basis, the people and things that they come across. We happen to be in a profession that we're asked to be, almost perfect in all times, when that might not be realistic, but the fact is that we need to make sure that we give our officers the greatest amount of skill sets that we can to get them towards that role of perfection, particularly when we're dealing with people, and then being able to, address their own concerns around their wellness on a daily basis. So I'm very appreciative of, our involvement with Roca, and certainly with our officers, particularly in this training in general.
Thank you, Commissioner. And again, thank you for the opportunity to do the training with your officers. I just want to, just wanted to mention, as Lloyd Major Wells helped us in Baltimore, Captain Terenzi really was a great partner to us implementing this training in Boston. And, you also mentioned that like de-escalation is critical for police officers, corrections officers today, right? And I always say this every time we do this training, you have to be able to control yourself before you can de-escalate a situation. And Rewire4, what we're trying to do, part of the training is de-escalation, wellness, community policing. But we have to make sure our officers can self-regulate and control themselves. And that creates those positive interactions with the community and de-escalate situations that, because that's going to happen. So it fits right in with all the other trainings. But thank you again, and appreciate you allowing us to go over there and giving us all that time. Thank you.
Thank you.
So our next speaker is going to come from a different type of law enforcement profession. And that's going to be Special Sheriff Cephalo from the Middlesex Sheriff's Department. Middlesex is the first corrections department that we trained. We trained their entire department as well in their last years in service training, which was eye-opening for me. I was never a corrections officer. So we do have a corrections officer. It's one of our lead facilitators that was with us. We wanted to make sure that you heard from, someone that does your job, and which was Derek Molden, and Derek did a great job. But again, your staff was fabulous. It was great. They allowed us to come in, and I'll let you speak on what you think about how we did when we came to Middlesex.
Excellent. Dave, thanks so much. On behalf of Sheriff Katusian, I want to thank you and Molly Baldwin for your collaboration and really the opportunity to participate today. It's very important. Sheriff Katusian and our entire team truly value the incredible partnership we have built with Roca over the years, not just through this Rewire4 training, but for the work that you do with us in our emerging adult unit at the Middlesex Jail and House of Correction in Billerica. Like Boston and Baltimore, our dedication to Rewire4 begins at the very top. From the outset, the sheriff was committed to ensuring that both our officers and our civilian staff at all levels of the organization and every type of job assignment would participate in this vital training. We began it in November of 2022 with our recruits in the 46th Basic Training Academy, our Correction Officer Training Academy. And then we quickly followed that up with senior command staff members, and then rolled it into yearly in-service, making it mandatory for managers, frontline supervisors, officers, and the remaining of our civilian staff to attend this training. In addition, each new Basic Training Academy staff of correction officers has completing it, bringing it really a number of staff members trained to over 700 employees. And that number is going to just increase with this current crop of recruits that are in the current Basic Training Academy. They're going to attend this training on October 16th. They'll graduate in November, ready to hit the ground running with this really crucial tool as part of their duty belt. In implementing Rewire4, the sheriff saw a number of potential benefits. The biggest being, and it was discussed earlier, the impact to officer and employee wellness. Very important. We know the significant toll this work takes on all those who work in public safety. And it's critical that we focus not just on physical health, that's important, but also the emotional and mental well-being of our team. And really, that's the key component of the Rewire4 training that we thought was extremely helpful. Second, we wanted to expand the tools that our team has to effectively interact with those in our care. Rewire's focus on brain science and trauma, it really helps our staff work more effectively with those in our care who've experienced trauma. Unfortunately, a significant percentage of our justice-involved population has experienced trauma in their lives. You know, I myself had the benefit of going through this training. I can speak firsthand to the positive impact it had on me, both personally and professionally. You know, trainings on policies and procedures are important. But the Rewire4 training requires us to think about how we act, how we react, and how can we do both more effectively, right? You know, as a father of 3 kids, it's helped me out tremendously on a personal level. I routinely kind of remind myself, hey, stay in top brain when I find myself slipping into bottom brain. That was one of the most, I thought, important parts of the training for me. And the first thing that I realized, it helped me recognize the difference between top brain and bottom brain. I never really knew that before. And so the training gave me the tools to recognize it when I'm slipping into bottom brain, and then how to pull myself out of it so I can make better decisions and have better interactions. The other part of the training, or was actually after the training, was the text reminders in the months following the training. Those are extremely helpful. Whoever came up with that idea, brilliant. I loved receiving them. I think all of us on this panel can say we receive a tremendous amount of text messages throughout the day. But I actually really enjoyed receiving them. They always kind of seemed to arrive just at the right moment. When I was dealing with a tough situation at work or at home, I would get the text and it would kind of give me an emotional reset. Very simple text message did that. They reminded me to take a deep breath and practice being present. There was one text message that actually impacted me so much. I sent an email to myself to remind me to kind of go back to me. So it really struck me. And it said, notice the cycle, take a pause, use a skill, and make a different choice. Seems really simple, but it's not always easy to do, especially when you're in a difficult situation or a high stress situation. So that just simple reminder allows you to be present. So the training followed by these reminder messages go a long way to helping us be able to do these critical things. You know, the Roca data and our own conversations with the members of our team really showed the true impact of the Rewire4 training for our staff at the Middlesex Sheriff's Office. The feedback we received has been overwhelmingly positive. And some of the most positive comments have come from our most veteran officers. We've heard from both officers and civilians that the training caused them to stop and just ask, can they take a better approach to a certain situation to achieve a better outcome? And they did that both in their professional and their personal lives. And we've heard from officers that hadn't yet taken the training that they're actually really looking forward to going to it because they heard such positive feedback from the officers that attended it. So that's when you know the training had an impact, because staff were really excited about attending. And that's really how impactful this has been for us. And actually, we're going to implement, I think, Dave, you know, we're going to implement a next step of some Roca training, of 4-hour supervisor leadership training for our senior command staff in the next couple months. So it's really been excellent for us. I'm going to close by just thanking Molly and the entire team at Roca. Special shout out to you, Dave. You've been a tremendous instructor for us, but you've also been a great sounding board for our training academy staff, our senior command staff. So I really can't thank you enough, and Molly, for allowing us to, you know, participate in this training, and also for allowing us to speak here today. So on behalf of Sheriff Katusian and the entire Middlesex Sheriff's Office team, thank you.
Special Sheriff, thank you very much. So I'm looking for another instructor, and the way you gave you have it down. You have all the feedback you just gave us. That was excellent. It's good to hear that it's, you know, that it's sticking and it's helping you. Now, the text messages, I do have to admit that based on my cynicism and 37-year career as a police officer, I didn't think they would work. But I have to give all the credit to Molly. Molly was like, Dave, we need to do this. It'll work. I was pleasantly surprised, but she was absolutely right.
One word, brilliant. Brilliant.
Thank you very much. And your academy training, the staff you have there at Middlesex, I've known for a few years now. Again, they do a tremendous job, and they were very, very, very helpful for us. Appreciate that.
They're top notch. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you. Okay, our next speaker, we're going to go a little bit off the board. Is not a police officer or a corrections officer, and her name is Maureen McGaw. I hope I'm saying that right. Better known as Mo, right? That's how it's the easiest way for me, Mo. And Mo is the co-founder of the 30 by 30 initiative and is also the executive director of the Excellence in Policing and Public Safety program at the University of South Carolina. And Mo has been helping us in other ways, trying to raise the level of this training and connecting us to a lot of people nationally in the criminal justice system. So Mo, thank you, and you're up.
Dave, thanks so much. These are fantastic presentations so far. I apologize if my video freezes. I'm actually doing some training, and I'm in a rather cozy basement. So the internet here is a little bit sketched, but hopefully it won't freeze in an awkward position. So as Dave mentioned, I'm Mo McGough, and I'm actually the executive director of the Excellence in Policing and Public Safety program at the University of South Carolina School of Law. Spent most of my career actually as a policy advisor at the U.S. Department of Justice, where I focused on evidence-informed approaches to advancing policing and improving public safety outcomes. And also spent some time as chief of strategic initiatives at the Policing Project at NYU Law. I had the distinct honor of first meeting Molly when Molly was working through the MIT Solve Challenge. And basically what MIT Solve was trying to do was find really innovative practices to improve community outcomes, advance public safety, and improve policing across the country. She brought Rewire4 to the MIT Solve sort of think tank, and I was one of the assessors there. And I can tell you, I was just completely blown away by what Molly and her team were building. You know, obviously this is an issue of critical importance, and I've been lucky to be involved in some officer safety and wellness initiatives throughout my career, but it's also something that's very personal to me. It's near and dear to my heart. My dad was a law enforcement officer for 30 years in St. Petersburg, Florida. And I can tell you, you know, he's been retired for 20 years now, but he still screams in his sleep. You know, when I think about just the critical disservice we're doing to the people who serve and protect us. And I couldn't think more highly of the approach that Molly and the Rewire4 team are taking. You know, one of the things we're doing here at the University of South Carolina is through the center, which was appropriated or which was funded through a $10 million appropriation of the South Carolina State Legislature, is really take this as an opportunity to advance the field when it comes to training and education. You know, we've heard a few times here that this is unlike anything else that's out there. And one of the things that I value most, in addition to the quality of the training, is the empirical support for its effects. We have really struggled as we build the center to find trainings that are empirically shown to make a difference in behavioral outcomes. There's a really sort of clogged field of options for officers out there. And it's really hard for departments to be able to discern what is worth their time, what is worth their money. And I think the evaluation that Rewire4 has done, the fact that they embed data and analysis from the very beginning of their engagements with agencies, really sets them apart. So that's why when I got here, I had sort of the positional authority to focus us in particular areas. And this is not hyperbolic. When it came to individual trainings, Molly was the first person we called. And so we're really trying to make it our mission to do what we can to raise funds through grants, to leverage our network across the state and across the country, to get Rewire4 in front of as many officers as we possibly can, as quickly as we possibly can, while also, you know, holding some fidelity to the model. So I'm just really grateful that Molly and the team were willing to work with us and partner with us. We've got some grants pending in front of the state of South Carolina. We've got some grants pending in front of the COPS office. And like I said, my hope in the next year is that we can partner with them and get this to as many people as we possibly can, because it's so critically needed. So Dave, thank you so much for the time, and thank you all for being on this call today.
Mo, thank you very much, and thank you for all your help. And, you know, Mo came to one of our classes when we were in Baltimore, and one of the things I always like to do is get a different perspective, not just from cops and corrections officers. I want to get a different perspective, people that aren't, you know, direct sworn officers, and Mo came to class, and after class, she said this was great, which made me feel good. So I thank you, Mo, for attending the class, taking the time, and helping us as much as you are. Appreciate all that.
Sure. And Dave, I should have mentioned too, so, in our quest to be really evidence informed at the Excellence of Policing and Public Safety program, our first hire was actually an educational psychologist. So any training and education that we offer to the field actually is run through her paces to make sure it adheres with the best practices in adult learning theory and education. So once we started partnering with Rewire4, one of the first things we did was send our educational psychologist to the training too. And she's a tough critic, and I can tell you she came back with, they're already doing it. So, it really is sort of empirically focused and reflecting the best practices for changing hearts and minds.
I mean, that's awesome to hear. Again, the goal always is to help officers. We want to make sure we're doing it the right way, and getting that reinforcement is always good for us. Thank you. So I want to be very conscious of everybody. We only have a few minutes left, and if there is any questions, then I want to get them in as soon as we can. But I also want to be very aware of everybody's time because we really appreciate it. So maybe I'll hand this over to Allie because he's much better at the technology than I am for questions and maybe some feedback. Allie?
Thank you, Dave. There's a couple questions that I wanted to leave for John Skinner and possibly even Mo to answer. One of the first questions was that John had mentioned a shift that happened with trauma and stress being discussed in policing. And this is very important due to the data around officer suicide and depression. So the question is whether there has been an equal shift in policing on how they deal with officers reporting this and not being penalized or taken off the job, which discourages officers from speaking up about mental health and stress. And how do we get a system of policing itself to respond to stress and trauma of officers in a more productive and encouraging way?
So Ellie, maybe I'll start and I'll hand it over to Mo. I think at a national level, the conversation about health and wellness across policing and public safety really started to, I think, gain traction during the late, 2015 and maybe onward. And I think some of the original reports were that although a lot of agencies were trying to do good work in health and wellness, it was very fragmented across the United States. And then to Mo's point, there wasn't a lot of evidence that suggested specific programs that departments were implementing were effective, or there wasn't any really research. It was just sort of like if it felt good or it seemed like it was a good idea, a lot of agencies would try to put it into place. I kind of think of the 21 departments that went through the first 18 months of our evaluation portion of the evaluation as probably being more in the front of the pack and more pioneers. Dave would tell you that probably in a lot of the agencies, they had EAP programs. Commissioner Worley, talked about the fact that they have made a really big investment in Baltimore about health and wellness and have an entire unit devoted to that. Usually during the course of the trainings, people from those initiatives would participate in the training in Rewire4. And I think all that was really helpful. But the truth is, quite honestly, that there's just more work that needs to be done in this area. Mo?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, John. And, I think one of the things to keep in mind is there's a lot of reason for hope here, because I think even a decade ago, this wasn't a conversation that was even being had on calls like this. And certainly wasn't being had, sort of in command staffs across the country. And we are definitely seeing an increase in willingness to engage. And obviously in a paramilitary structure like policing, leadership on the issue is critically important and setting the example. And one of the things we've done at EPS to really get our arms around, what training and education is critically needed is we did a crosswalk with other sort of command staff training offerings across the country. And mental health and organizational health is in all of them, right? So I do think we're sort of seeing a trend in supporting that kind of work. The other thing that I'd be curious, John, and maybe this is something we can explore offline, is sort of an increase in help-seeking behavior and support for help-seeking behavior. It was a really great point that, it wasn't so long ago that doing that could actually be a disservice to your career. I can tell you here in South Carolina, we have a lot of departments that actually have partnerships with mental health providers that are outside of the department, and it's completely confidential. So it's department sponsored. And of course, if there's a threat to life or critical threat to safety that's reported. But anything beyond that, the department just anonymously supports officers getting the critical help they need. So I think there's a lot of promising models out there. I think one of the benefits of this training, you know, acknowledging that it's not therapy, but it does sort of raise awareness of mental health and mental stability, is I would imagine it gives officers a better sense of where they are on their own mental health journey, and also provides them some language about how to describe where they are and know whether or not they need to seek help and support outside of that training.
Thank you, Mo and John. I think that was a great question. And then there was another two-part question. Probably, John, you can answer this. Part one, is there data on how the training changed or didn't change practice in the field? And as well as, is there thought to assess through administrative data in addition to our officer self-reported surveys?
Yeah, great question. So the second stage of the evaluation really focuses on that, right? So the way that's conducting is or occurring is in individual departments. Once again, we're splitting officers into two groups. Half the officers will go through the training and half won't. And then we're using internal administrative measurements to see if there's changes in behaviors. One of the things that we're looking at is after the training, are you more likely, for example, to seek help when you're feeling stressed? We're looking at administrative measurements related to force, related to complaints, related to traffic accidents, different things like that. And then we've rolled into this second phase also it's really a victim survey. So after an officer encounters a victim, we have the victim sort of like complete an electronic survey and on a pretty low level crime, just to get the citizen's perspective on the professionalism of the officer. And we'll be comparing if that professionalism shifts, you know, whether the officer went through Rewire4 or did not. It's kind of like an extension of that question related to empathy. So that's where the second stage of the evaluation is. The first stage, once again, was more descriptive in nature. It was specifically designed to look at the perceptions of the officers. How did the officers feel, right? The training impacted them. You know, what was their stress levels and emotional regulation before the training and at those incremental time periods after. But really excellent question.
That is the only other question I had right now, but I see I'm answering a few in the Q&A. I just had one that said, could you cover, again, the data collection evaluation related to the use of force and officer safety in the correctional setting? I think that we talked a little bit about this. It will be in the recording that we'll send of this afterwards. But if John or Dave, if either of you have any other thoughts on use of force or officer safety in correctional setting, please feel free to share.
Yeah, so just for a point of clarification on that too, right? So the use of force information that I presented in the presentation was based upon an officer's perception, right? So the question was, you know, how frequently are you using force, right, over the last 3 or 6 month time period? And then they responded to that question. And that can be drilled down by category of officer or by, you know, job type, right? So we have that ability to do that within the data. And some of that is done within the evaluation report. The second stage of the evaluation, which will be available, you know, probably by the end of year 2025, will be more based upon the administrative data related to use of force. So we'll have a little bit more clarity related to that. And obviously, use of force in a correctional environment is a little bit different than use of force in a police or community environment. So the randomized control trial that we currently have going on is specifically within a police department, but doing it in a correctional institution, I think, would be really helpful too.
I'd like to add to what John, that's really interesting what John said. I mean, I learned a lot when we started doing some correctional training. It is definitely different. So I don't know if Special Sheriff Cephalo is still on, but maybe if you are Special Sheriff, if you could just talk a little bit about that, if you're available. If not, that's okay.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, really important question. I think one of the major benefits of the training and how it correlates to use of force in a correctional setting is that it allows officers to use those tools to de-escalate situations, right? And it's true, use of force in a police setting is different than a correctional setting. In a correctional setting, most of the times we have more time, right, to address and deal with the situation. And so with more time, you can utilize different tools in your toolbox, so to speak. And one of those tools, I think, is the Rewire4 training, because it allows you to take a step back, recognize a situation that might be escalating, and say, okay, where am I? Where is this individual? And how do I de-escalate the situation? So I think there's a direct correlation to the two, and it's helpful.
Thank you, Special Sheriff. One of the things that attracted me to this training, and I've had the opportunity to do a lot of trainings, and I did some de-escalation trainings for police officers, is that this helps the officer with their own emotional regulation. I think that which made the difference. It's difficult to de-escalate a situation if you can't control yourself. So I think this training is almost that step before you learn how to de-escalate, right? You got to be able to control yourself. So in either setting, I think it applies, whether it's policing or corrections, we have to have control, because we're all held to a higher standard, right? Because you have that power and authority that no one else has. So it definitely can help in either profession.
Thank you all so much. I don't see any more questions currently in the Q&A or chat, but people can still feel free to ask questions. You'll receive an email from me directly that has the PowerPoint and recording at a minimum. And if you feel like you want to ask any questions as follow-up in an email directly to me, feel free, and I can make sure that they get to our wonderful panelists and team for an answer.
Thank you, Allie. Before we close, if any of the panelists would like to have any closing remarks, you would have the opportunity to do that now. So if that's something that any of the panelists would like to do, please jump on. And if not, I want to thank everybody for their time. Thank everybody for their support and their interest in Rewire4 training. And the goal of Rewire4 training is to help those officers control themselves, which in turn can help keep everybody safe in our communities. So we will stay on a little bit longer. If there's anybody, I think we have a little bit of meat eater on here also, but we will hang in there if anybody else has any questions. If there are no more questions and no more comments, thank you all. Enjoy the rest of the day. Have a great weekend, and everybody, please stay safe. Thank you.